will you commit to making any report Mueller produces at the conclusion of his investigation available to Congress and to the public?
As I said in my statement, I am going to make as much information available as I can, consistent with the rules and regulations that are part of the special counsel regulations.
Donald Trump's new pick for Attorney General there, not really committing to make the Mueller report public, which is what so many people have been waiting on. In fact, the House investigations under the Democrats have said they've been staying out of the way of many things until that report comes out. Well, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Adam Schiff, joins me now. Thank you for being here on such a big day for these issues. What did you think of that answer?
I found it completely unsatisfactory. That answer and the answer on recusal are the two red flags for me. The problem with his answer, basically, I won't agree to defer to what Bob Mueller thinks should be public, is we now have a situation where an incoming attorney general takes the position you can't indict the sitting president. You can only impeach a sitting president, and I'm not committing to share with Congress or the American people the information you would need to know to make a judgment about whether the president's conduct rises to that level.
Congressman, you just put your finger on it. I think this is so important. There is a legitimate debate within our system of government of what do you do if you find bad enough things about a sitting president. But if this president, in the middle of that investigation, installs someone who can short-circuit whether the public or the Congress learns that information, then it seems to actually be potentially changing our system of government's check on that situation.
Well, it certainly highlights the need for Congress to continue its investigation, because the Attorney General nominee made clear today he's not making any promises about what he shares with Congress. We can expect, I guess, top-line conclusions from Bob Mueller. We can expect him to follow the letter of the law, that if he turns down a prosecutorial decision by Mueller, he'll notify Congress. But that's all he's promising.
Which is him literally saying, I'll follow the rules. That's what he's supposed to do. You mentioned recusal. For viewers, again, this was such a big day on the Hill. Let's look at Bill Barr on recusal questioning.
I will seek the advice of the career ethics personnel, but under the regulations, I make the decision as the head of the agency as to my own recusal. And
let's imagine it's a judgment call, and the judgment by the career ethics officials in the agency are that you recuse yourself. Under what scenario would you not follow their recommendation?
If I disagreed with it.
And what would the basis of that disagreement be?
I came to a different judgment.
On what basis?
The facts.
Such as?
Such as whatever facts are relevant to the recusal.
Good enough?
No, not at all good enough. And, you know, in the absence of his writing this 19-page memo outlining all the flaws in the Mueller investigation and how Mueller, you know, is crazy to think this is a viable case on obstruction of justice, you might have an arguable claim that I could ignore the advice of ethics lawyers. But here he is saying, this wasn't a job application. I wasn't really pursuing this. I was just, you know, issuing this report to the Justice Department. If that is true, then don't put yourself forward as a candidate. But if you're going to, you darn well better listen to the ethics lawyers. And in my experience, and I've sought advice of ethics lawyers on different things, you follow their advice for the very reason that because it pertains to you, you're not an objective party. You have an interest in the answer to the ethics question. That's why you go to someone independent. You say, tell me from an independent perspective, should I recuse myself? And I cannot see a good faith basis to refuse to do so. And given what he is saying, that the reason he was interested in this job when it was brought to him was that he thought a credible resolution of this would be in the national interest. It won't be credible if he ignores the advice of the ethics lawyers. So in my view, you either commit to that, or you commit to recusal on the front end, or you don't seek the job. But without that kind of commitment, he certainly wouldn't have my vote.
It sounds like, from what you saw today, you are now more concerned that if this person, Bill Barr, is confirmed, you're more concerned that we may not learn all the facts from the Mueller probe.
I am. Now, I have to say that I didn't find his answers today very surprising, because I think he had telegraphed this was where he was likely to come down. But to me, it validates the concern that the president, he may not have submitted that application as a job application, but that's how the president viewed it. He was picked by the president for the purpose of his hostility to the investigation. Justice Matt Whitaker was picked for his hostility to the investigation. It's astonishing to me that, notwithstanding Bill Barr's otherwise broad experience, that he would be even considered for the job after weighing in such a hostile way to the seminal investigation that the Justice Department is conducting.
Because you read the memo, and this was debated among other senators, you read the memo as prejudging the outcome.
It certainly prejudges the outcome on obstruction of justice. And now he has tried to caveat that today. But when you read his memo, he says, among other things, that even when a president, their own interests are involved, basically the Attorney General is his hand, is his arm, and he can do as he wishes, and it's not obstruction of justice, that it would be highly problematic to be in a situation where you can even question the motives of a president. Well, he struck a different tone today, but the underlying legal philosophy he's operating under is one of a very powerful unitary authority of the president, such that, you know, he is there to do the president's will.
And this assessment of a person who could become Mueller's boss comes against the extraordinary backdrop of the New York Times reporting that the FBI looked at Donald Trump as a counterintelligence investigation because they were concerned he might be a Russian asset. Was that new information when you read the Times story, and what are Americans to take from it?
You know, I can't go into what we were initially briefed in terms of the FBI's interest concern. Was it criminal? Was it counterintelligence? You know, who were they looking at? I can't go into the specifics of that. I can tell you from our committee's point of view, counterintelligence has been at the heart of our concerns. And a concern that a foreign government might have leverage over the president has been at the heart of our concerns. And we're determined to get to the bottom of it. Something explains the president's bewildering conduct of Russia policy. When you add to that what the Washington Post has disclosed, that he made an effort to not only exclude people from the room when he would meet with Putin, but may have attempted to make sure the record of that never saw the light of day.
And to try to get out from under sanctions and get out from NATO in new reporting and get out from Syria, where Putin wants a broader sphere of influence. Is your basic message to the public it's actually worse than it looks from the public information?
You know, it's hard to be worse than it looks, honestly. You know, let's say there was no compromise and this was just the president acting on his own. You could not act in a way that was more furthering of Russian interests and more antagonist to our own interest than to be denigrating NATO, talk about withdrawing from NATO, bashing our democratic allies, praising autocrats, talking about doing away with sanctions on Russia for invading its neighbor. I mean, those actions and others, you could not fashion something more destructive of our interests. You know, I used to joke, and maybe I shouldn't joke about this, but the best case that the president is not an asset of the Russians is the Russians would tell him, slow down. You're too obvious. They're going to be onto you.
He looks like he's trying to please them too much.
Well, you know, I say that in jest, but the reality is his policies have been so pro-Russian and so destructive of our alliances that, you know, it beggars an explanation. And if that explanation is compromise, it needs to be exposed.
And we're running over time here. The Manafort filing does seem bad for the administration, and then it says he was trying to have contact with them, and also has this Russian-linked figure allegedly witness tampering. Your bottom line on this filing tonight?
Well, like a lot of the special counsel filings, the most important and probably most interesting parts are redacted. And what I find most notable is the sections on Konstantin Kilimnik are the most redacted.
Yeah.
Now, this is someone who the special counsel has acknowledged they believe is affiliated with the Russian intelligence. So here you have the campaign chairman of the Trump campaign lying about his contacts with someone believed to be in league with Russian intelligence. And those are the most redacted, just in my superficial view, parts of this pleading.
Well, I can tell we've been doing this tonight, but since you brought it up, you're right. These are highly redacted, and you're saying that means there are things that Mueller has that are so sensitive there, we're just not going to know yet.
Yes, and of all the things that you might lie about when you're in a cooperation agreement, the fact that what you're lying about involves someone believed to be associated with Russian intelligence ought to concern us the most.
Right, and you're wording it very carefully, which I appreciate, but your answer overlaps with your colleague, the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, on this as well, regarding what else may be intuited or intimated here without being spelled out that is so concerning. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.